So you can look at the older architecture as having been part of the original civilization, and the Masons or whoever just came in and claimed credit for it. You know, they might have put a cornerstone in with, we did this, or a year on top over the door. They emulated the original Masons who did it, but they infiltrated the original Masonic lodges and claimed credit for a legacy that wasn't theirs to begin with. But they were into pulling truths over our eyes. And I think they were also making the surface of the earth livable, because I believe that there was a cataclysm that was deliberately caused through the earth's grid lines.
So are they trying to create another type of, I don't know, maybe reset or something like that?
I think so. Their goal is a one world government, one world religion. Implant. If you don't take an implant, you don't get to go shopping. You don't get to participate in society. That I remember hearing that when I was a kid. Did any of us take it seriously? I mean, if we'd taken it seriously, maybe the world would be different now. But so that's been their long-term goal. They want to completely take over us. If we don't comply, they don't want us around. You hear about re-education camps. There's some places that this has actually been implemented. So let's deconstruct that a little bit, because it's what our reality that we know has been operating like. Prior to this erasure of this original advanced civilization, people knew who they were, they knew where they were. There was no argument about the shape of the earth. None of that. People were working together in harmony.
Those and the reset would be, it would seem easy. I didn't mean to cut you off. It would seem easier if it was like some type of, like I said, simulation or something, you know, where they can just kind of hack into the program somehow and just reset.
Well, so they've been that's what they've been creating, this virtual reality that we have been programmed to accept through computer video games and television. And
they want us to be plugged. They want us to be plugged into it.
And you know, cell phones, and it's an artificial reality. Meta games, avatars for your social media. I won't have one. They want to, you know, see me as a cartoon. Cartoons.
Coming to you from an undisclosed location, somewhere in the northern hemisphere, waiting out the alien apocalypse. He is armed with a machete and a microphone. Join Michael James as he seeks answers to the paranormal, conspiracies, ancient mysteries, and the occult. Are you ready to trip the fuck out? This is Beyond the Forbidden.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michelle. So, I really appreciate you coming on Beyond the Forbidden. I had you on last year. And it's, man, I love your information, and the information you present is very deep. It makes you think about our true origins, our history, the manipulation of our history. You know, are we even on the correct timeline? Just so many crazy things, you know, with mud flood to Tartaria. But Michelle Gibson, welcome back to Beyond the Forbidden. How you been?
Doing really well, Michael, and it's great to be here. And I've been researching now for over 5.5 years. Everything goes into writing first, and that's my first love. And then I turn all my blog posts into videos. And that works really well for me and for my processes. And it's important to say this at the beginning, I think, because there's a lot of people that are doing really, really great research. And it doesn't matter whether we're all in agreement or not, or see things differently. What's important is that people are doing what they're motivated to do and getting the information that they've been guided to out to the general public. So our viewers have as much information as possible to start putting the puzzle back together again. Because it's not cut and dried. I have a very definite opinion about what I think the civilization was all about. And it's not anything like what we've been told. But there's still big things that I just don't have an explanation for. And all I know is that in the process of looking at cities and places in alignment all over the earth, based on sacred geometry and a very high level of consciousness and intelligence and integration, that prior to something happening to wipe that civilization off the face of the earth, was highly advanced, harmonious, beautiful. And I'm seeing that in the architecture. I use written information to a point to show me where to look. And then once I know where to look, I start looking at buildings and the actual infrastructure, because you can't hide that. But you can put the false narrative into writing, and I think they were doing a lot of that. So, for me, written materials and written records that we have access to, not the ones under the Vatican Library, or other hidden libraries, or libraries that have been burned historically. Some in the distant past and some even more recently, to get rid of that original information. What we have access to, you just have to be really discerning in that information, and realize that we've been living in a system that's been telling us lies and teaching us lies. And you have to kind of pull back from everything you've ever been told to reach that understanding, because it's just not, they're still lying to us to this day. And thankfully, because of the internet and because of people waking up, that's becoming clearer and clearer to more people. What's going on in the world today, and even right now in the halls of government, what's really going on here.
I think that was a very good intro to start this conversation, kind of to warm the waters up a little bit, which we're going to be diving into a lot of that information. So we're going to have new listeners on the scenes, Michelle, and I guess give you don't have to spend too much time. Just give a little bit of background on yourself. And you said you've been doing this mostly for 5 years, but I'm surely that curiosity has gone back much longer than that. Give a little bit of groundwork just for the newcomers and the new listeners that didn't get to watch the last interview that we did last year.
Sure. So my bachelor's degree is actually social work and psychology. That was what I studied in college after I got out of the Army. And I think we both share military background.
Yep, military police.
And I got my money for college from the Army. It was great in the early 80s when I was in. And before I went in, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Once I got out, I was really focused. I wanted to be a social worker. I wanted to work with the elderly. And so that was my primary career for 13 years. I always loved history, and I'm so glad I did not get a degree in history or in archaeology, because I don't think I would have been open to receive the information that I've been receiving. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Rockville, Maryland, Gaithersburg, Rockville. And I started noticing things from a very young age that I just kind of filed in the back of my mind. that didn't start coming back to me until I started doing my own research. So I've been doing my own original research for over 5 years. Up until that point, from years ago, I was interested in hidden history, alternative history. And when I was a little kid, I can remember playing in the woods while my dad was practicing softball for the church softball team, and going down into the woods and finding these big stones. Didn't think anything of it, and it was really cool down there. And this was in a place, Twin Brook was the name of the neighborhood in Rockville where I grew up, or anyway, childhood area. And it was next to Rock Creek, which is connected to Washington, D.C. And if you look at pictures of Rock Creek now, in a lot of places, there's big honking boulders at Rock Creek. And one of the cover-up code words that they use a lot are places with rock or stone in the name. Because once you start realizing that there are megalithic stones all around us, just laying around, we've never been taught this. You don't see it. And that's how they've managed to hide a lot of stuff, is they control our perception. Because I don't know how many people are familiar with the Rockefellers being involved in the American educational system, starting around 1850, 1851, 1852, somewhere in there. And so they've given us the narrative that they want us to believe. So probably the Rockefellers and the Freemasons and other secret societies and the Jesuits and whoever's been behind the scenes feeding us this crap. And that's hard. I mean, that sounds harsh, but it really is something to take into consideration, and that's when I said you have to let go of everything you've ever been taught to get to the true history of the earth, civilization, and humanity. Because the Rockefeller educational system, for example, just wanted to produce people that were educated enough to follow directions, read directions, become productive workers, not question what they're told. They might promote people up into higher education, but that's all part of the same system. That's how this information gets perpetuated, because, this is, people spent years in academic study, and, they've got their careers and their beliefs invested in this information. And so it's difficult to realize the extent to which we've been lied to.
Can I cut you off real fast?
Sure.
You're talking about the educational system. I interviewed, because if I didn't, this isn't part of my notes, so I'll probably forget if I didn't interject, but last year I interviewed Brooks Agnew, Brooks Elwood, or he's a professor at LSU. I live in Louisiana State University. He's the one, Brooks, I forgot his last name. He's the one that brought the mounds on the LSU campus, and stated that they're the oldest. I forgot what he said. They're the oldest mounds in the United States. And he brought that research, and he was getting so much heat, so much backlash. And so I asked him, about, he was a little hesitant. He, like, during the interview, the first maybe 20, 30 minutes, he was kind of, I don't know, but I kind of warmed up, or he warmed up to me. He kind of spoke more freely towards the end of the interview. And he said that people in the educational system, that they have to watch what they say. I'm paraphrasing what he said. They have to watch what they say because of a funding. Yes, a lot of people out there, they have open minds, and they want to push back against the narrative, but they can't because they have to make a living.
Mhm.
That's like, which we all knew that, but that's crazy coming from an actual professor at, pretty big college.
Yeah.
By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers. Behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else. And that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.
And that's very strong and powerful part of the establishment in our society, and they're like gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
When you really think about it, SATs, and I can't think of the name of the other the ACT, I guess. I took the SATs. I'm a great student. I was a terrible test taker. My SAT scores were not that great.
Mm-hmm. Mine either.
I mean, maybe, I think it was 940. So I probably kind of fell in the middle. But if I applied to a college where they were going to seriously look at my SAT scores, it's like, why? It's just testing my ability to take tests well. And then they can do whatever.
What I did, Michelle? You know what I did? Mine weren't good because I always had this rebel-like mentality, to push back against the system, which I've always been interested in the paranormal, like ancient mysteries, the bizarre, things like that. But I really kind of got into deeper, dark conspiracies when I got back from basic training in 06, January 06. I was there for 6 months through the whole basic training and AIT. And I was there in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri during Katrina. I live in Louisiana. It was crazy. You only get like 2 minutes to talk on the phone. But anyways, during back to the test taking. Back in high school, I didn't care. It was like, I didn't know what I want to do in life. Like, yes, we're fed this belief that we have to go to college, but I didn't care. Like, back in my subconscious, I had this rebel-like mentality. So what I did on the test, Michelle, I filled in bubbles. I don't even know if I even tried on one answer. I just went through it. I had that I don't give a shit mentality. I'm going to do, I don't know. It's not like I was careless or reckless, but I knew something wasn't right. And I just like, F this, man. You know what I mean? I just knew something wasn't right back then, but everything happens for a reason. And, and here I am today interviewing people like you and so many guests, but go ahead.
Yeah. So why even have a test like that? I mean, if somebody wants to apply for college and they show the initiative by having good grades or why even put kids through that whole ritual of taking a standardized test? And I did try. I still didn't do well. So,
wouldn't it be crazy?
Anyways,
Wouldn't it be crazy if I scored like crazy high? I'm like, they're like, oh, he's the smartest person ever. But like, I just filled it out, Yep.
Now I did do well on the ASVAB. So I did well on the military test, and I took the language test, the D-Lab, and I didn't pass that, but I passed another test, and I ended up in non-Morse intercepting. So I was in signals intelligence, and
I did try on the ASVAB because I was like, I didn't know what I want to do. So what do we do, Michelle, when we don't know what we want to join the military?
Well,
Screw it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's where I was. I had a year of college and I was changing my major every week, and then you get in with a heavy dose of life experience And by the time you get out of the military, if it hasn't, derailed your life, because I tell people the military is what you make it. If you put your heart in it and you do what you're supposed to, it's a stepping stone. But if you mess up, there is no worse place to mess up. And so it's really what you put into it. And so anyway, I got out of that service. I was focused, and within a couple of years, I guess, the internet started coming in. And prior to, let's say, the 80s, there might be things like Chariots of the Gods and a few other things that were you could buy and read about. But it's something where they had control of the narrative still. Once the internet came in, they lost that control, thankfully. We'd have a harder time getting out of this mess, I think, if we couldn't connect and do our own research. And I used to like to watch programs like Unsolved Mysteries and In Search of and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. And I love that kind of stuff. So I really think I kind of had a path. It's like I look at it as my spiritual path, because my whole life led me to having the experiences that I needed to be able to start putting the puzzle together. And I did love history in secondary school. And what that gave me was a knowledge of what they tell us. So when I'm doing my research, I kind of have those reference points because I took a lot of history classes. I wasn't particularly interested in United States history, but I loved European history. And so I was learning about the Renaissance and other things. And I guess when I really started to wake up, I was living in Fairbanks, Alaska, in around I moved back there after my husband died. It's a long story, but he and I had lived there from 94 to 99. I moved back in 2006 and I lived there until 2012. It was between 2006 and 2012 that I really started getting in a lot of this information and started to wake up. And 2007, I took a Flower of Life workshop and learned about sacred geometry. I was reading more alternative information through friends I had reconnected with, and getting, alternative books that, they didn't give me all the answers, but I'm starting to collect information. And I was really interested at December 21st of 2012. So that's supposedly the end of the Mayan calendar. Because I was tuned into that and trying to get more information about that, I just started getting more data in.
I interviewed him, John Major Jenkins, before he died on my old show, Cryptic Knowledge Radio, I think back in 2010.
Yeah. And he was one of them.
Yeah.
He was one of the people that I read. And in one of his books, he showed the geometric grid around the United Kingdom and Great Britain, and how the Isle of Man was in the center. And so I'm starting to get this picture of things are laid out geometrically. But all of this has been removed from our awareness. So, I think a lot of people came in all around the same time to start bringing out these bits of knowledge. So John Major Jenkins would have been a forerunner of that. Getting it back out into the collective awareness, because these are things that you need to understand. So I was introduced to the work of Drunvalo Melchizedek, and he was basically the one that brought in the Flower of Life workshops and the Merkaba and the human light body, and many others as well. So it's all important. And so around between 2006, 2012, I'm picking up all this information. I'm starting to wake up. Spiritually, I'm kind of the opinion that we're all here to have our own unique experiences, and we're all connected to the divine directly. And so I'd see organized religion as something that came in with the hijack, and I definitely see that now. I felt that for years, but
Do you
um,
think that we're co-creators within this reality, whatever this reality is?
that would work. Yeah, I mean, I think they've tricked us into giving away our power as sovereign beings. They started putting us making us companies when they were starting to make corporations people. So
Mhm.
corporations became people and we became companies with, the straw man and, people that are familiar with that. Um, how our birth certificates have been traded on the stock exchange. So so they are disempowering us and we don't know any better, so we're giving them our power and our authority. And that's one of the beautiful things about waking up, because when we stop doing that and say we don't consent, they can't do anything because they have no legitimate basis for what they're doing.
Mhm.
They're, it's wrong. It's more than wrong. On a universal level, it's wrong. They can't do what they're doing. Their only hope was to do what they've done, which was to get in and take over everything. All the resources, all the money, our education, our religious beliefs, um, our history, on down the line. Give us all these distractions. Give us organized sports. Give us organized gambling. Give us organized religion. So that we are, in 9 to 5 jobs. And, forever people worked every day. And children worked for a long time for barely subsistence wages. So there was a wage slavery going on. Um,
Well, that's still kind of going on in certain countries.
and probably here to a certain extent, though I think it's going on in other countries because they just left here and went somewhere else, when unions came in or when resources were depleted. Mill towns and mining towns in Appalachia. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the reason for the poverty there today. And those people didn't have a chance. These isolated places that had the mill towns and the company owned the mills and the schools and the stores, and they weren't given real money. They were given scrip, and that's the only place they could go. So they had a job for life, but it
Hmm.
was that was, barely living. And so that system was very much here. Um, and again, probably it would be here more, except people unionized and resources were depleted. So let's go somewhere else and do it in another country. All part of their plan. I mean, how'd they get so wealthy? The whole system was rigged. And again, I've really come into this level of awareness by tracking cities and places in alignment. And the whole story fell out when I was doing that. I was seeing the same kinds of infrastructure and architecture all over the world. And this can be found anywhere. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere special. Now you live in the heart of the Wachita Empire. And so that was the imperial capital of the Wachita Empire, which was ruled by an empress. And there still is an empress of the Wachita today. And I believe it's still in the name of the parish. It's Wachita Parish.
That's the parish I live in, is Washita Parish.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's really all around there. Um, but again, we tend not to see it. And then if you start looking around, you'll start to see megalithic stone blocks, things like that. It's more than that. Earthworks, like the earthworks on LSU. The earthworks are all over the place. A lot of them were destroyed, but there's still a lot in existence. Poverty Point, if you have ever been up there,
Oh yeah.
very sacred site, ancient. And then there's a place on private property in Richwood, south of Monroe, that has something called the Watson Lunar Breaks. And while you can't go visit it, there's some pictures online, and the earthwork there looks the same as the earthwork at Stonehenge in Great Britain, in England. So it doesn't have the big stones on it, but has the same circular shape that circles Stonehenge.
That's crazy. I live here. Richwood's probably 10 miles away from me or so, roughly. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, they've cut off access. And that's true of a lot of sacred areas. You just can't get to them.
Well, you're talking about our history being kept from us, our true history. I live here in Washita Parish, and like I said, Richwood's roughly 10 miles away from me, and I didn't even know about that. That's right here in my backyard.
I read a book by a man named Frank Joseph, and he did a lot of work on Atlantis, and he did a lot of work on Lemuria.
Interviewed him about 6-7 years ago. Yeah.
So he also, let me see if I can find a list of his books, because this is important. This is where I learned about the Washita.
Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age is one I have.
Yeah. Let me figure out where my thing is. So the one that I read where I learned about the Washita, and even though he had quite a bit of the puzzle, he didn't have it all. Okay, so he wrote books like The Lost Civilization of Lemuria.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of forbidden history books. So this is specifically about King Juba. Here it is. The Lost Treasure of King Juba, The Evidence of Africans in America Before Columbus. I read that book when I was living in Oklahoma City, and I was pretty close to where you are. And this is when I really started waking up to the civilization, because it is everywhere. It's all over OKC, that I started to see. And I read this book, learned about the Washita Moors, and I was connected with a Washita lady that lives in Monroe, and some travel friends of mine and I went down to see her, one of whom is a Moor, and he does have some Washita connection, but he was just waking up to this. I mean, this has been kept from everybody, but he's the reason I started to wake up to that aspect of the Moorish presence in North America. So I read this book, and what Frank Joseph was saying is that they brought, so the children of Cleopatra and Mark Antony came over. And you hear about that in Southern Illinois, that there was Burroughs Cave, and Russell Burroughs went down in there and he found these Egyptian tombs and things like that, caskets. But that's kind of been out there for a while, and it was the idea that Cleopatra's children brought over everything. I mean, at the time, no other explanation, but as this picture develops, there was an ancient civilization here for a long, long time. So LSU mounds, Watson Break mounds go back to like 5,000 years. Same time frame as Stonehenge. They look the same. You have mounds all over, there's mounds in a lot of places in North America. Some places are called mounds, and probably more aren't. but they're geometric shapes in the landscape.
And then we have deltas and canals systems, big time, Louisiana, Mississippi, here in the South.
So you have, they're called rivers, but they're really canals. And if you look at aerials of the Mississippi Delta in Louisiana, you see canal shapes in the water.
Who created those?
So that would be these people, the Washita.
How far back does this go, Michelle?
A long way. This is information that's really hard to find, because it's been so hidden. But they're called the Ancient Ones, and they go back to Lemuria. They go back to, I mean, it all connects back in our history, but because we're not supposed to know about any of this, they gave us that, and that's why I say they gave us garbage history.
Mm-hmm.
It falls apart when you start looking at it. So if you look at even in New Orleans, and you look at all the architecture that Huey P. Long was supposed to have had built during his administration, and it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
The Huey P. Long Bridge, the state capitol building, all of these things that were supposedly done in his administration during the Depression. And we don't have any other information, so we believe it. There was this whole building thing that was supposedly going on during the Great Depression when the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. was being built. That thing's humongous.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Between 1932 and 1935. Yeah, right. I mean, but the same thing is true of this, monumental architecture that and if you look at Monroe, there's a lot that's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Just look up old pictures of Monroe. Where'd it go?
I know. It's like it just vanished overnight. and I want to talk a little bit about, and we're going to be talking about, we're just trying to lay the groundwork, especially for a lot of new listeners to you. So I guess let's go and get into some of this, and it's all going to interconnect one way or another, like one big spider's web. So let's go here first, Michelle. So you have a video on your YouTube channel called "What on Earth is Going On in the 1800s," which is pushing 300,000 views. Can you, before we go any further, can you give a synopsis, to the audience of that video, and what conclusions did you come to, Michelle? It's a great video, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a lot more I could add now. And
I think that was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. And, my viewers will tell me what I did well and what I didn't do well. And what is obvious to me isn't obvious to everybody. And so for that particular video, I was in a hurry to get it out, and I was just putting together, pieces of information sequentially. But
people obviously loved it. It's got a lot of views. So
but I've refined it even more. So let me kind of back up a little bit and tell you my points of reference. So I learned about the Moors, and this was a worldwide civilization. The Washita Moors just happened to be in North America, and I think there were other Moors, Morocco Moors, like around in New England, so forth. The Washita Moors were more in the midsection. So if you look at the diagram of the Louisiana Purchase, it pretty much looks like a map of the Washita Empire. And that was what they were doing. And that's early 1800s, and that ties into your question. So I had the piece about the Moors. I had the piece about sacred geometry. I had started to do research on cities and places in alignment because I found a star tetrahedron which is a sacred geometric figure when I connected cities and places in North America.
I think you discussed that last time. I think we screen shared your end, and we went into detail with that a little bit about that.
And that was really the beginning of my original research and starting to get the bigger picture. Because then ultimately I ended up writing down cities and places that lined up in lines and circles off of that shape. So I think that's the terminus of the Earth's grid. And I had in my mind, I was just kind of playing around with it, that there was a connection between 1492, which was the year of the fall of the Moors in Spain, the fall of Granada, and 1942, which was just right about halfway through the Second World War, and it was also the year of the Philadelphia experiment. And then I went to the middle, which was 1717. That's the exact middle. And I did some early work on researching the years between 1492 and 1942 and what happened, and a particular emphasis on 1717, because that was the midpoint year. One of the things, a couple of things happened in 1717. There's probably a whole list of things, but the Premier Grand Lodge of London was founded in 1717. The Anno Lucis was adopted by the Premier Lodge of England. So that's the Masonic calendar called the Anno Lucis. And it's not what they make it sound like, or at least not in a good way. And it was around that time that the Stuarts were completely prevented from the British throne, and the German Georgian kings came in, even though there was a little bit of Stuart blood in that lineage that came in. They needed a little bit to legitimize it. And that was all happening around the same time. There was something called the Company of the Mississippi Company. John Law. This happened in 1717, and they came up the Mississippi River starting in Louisiana. And they had somehow laid claim to all these lands and all these things that were going on, and millionaires were created and the bubble burst. But that happened in 1717 too. So they just kind of came in and went up the Mississippi, and colonizers ended up going down the Ohio also, but there was a lot of stuff that fell out when I looked at that. And one of the buildings with the old State House in Baton Rouge is just a gorgeous, gorgeous building. The stained glass windows and everything. So you can look at the older architecture as having been part of the original civilization, and the Masons or whoever just came in and claimed credit for it. They might have put a cornerstone in with, we did this, or a year on top over the door. They emulated the original Masons who did it, but they infiltrated the original Masonic lodges and claimed credit for a legacy that wasn't theirs to begin with. But they were into pulling truths over our eyes. And I think they were also making the surface of the earth livable, because I believe that there was a cataclysm that was deliberately caused through the Earth's grid lines that caused lands to sink, that caused swamps, that caused deserts, but like a ripple across the surface of the earth. And that the Masons came in and, made roads, and just on top of wherever the land landed. It's like that where I live in Arizona. I mean, this is a crazy looking place. It's like, a typical mud flood is if, you have a slant and the building it's like, there's just a little top of a window at one end and the whole window at the bottom, or an archway or whatever. I mean, that's a key indicator.
It's a lot of that in Eureka Springs, Arkansas.
And I've actually visited there. And like I said, there's a lot in this part of Arizona where I live. There was a lot in other places I've been. I mean, this was a worldwide wave.
When do you think the last one was? This reset, this mud flood, this reset, whatever caused the mud flood, and liquefations and the Earth's crust, the ripple, and all that. When do you think? I know a lot of it's speculation, but just according to all the information you come across, either others and making your hypotheses on others' work and your own personal research, when do you think the last one was?
I think there was one big one, that this civilization existed for a long time, this advanced civilization. I do believe that the Philadelphia experiment had something to do with it.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more here in just a minute.
And it was a direct assault on the Earth's grid system. And that that's a little hard to grasp, but I really believe that. I'm not seeing evidence for reset after reset. Everything was just so integrated. If you look at subway systems, if you look at streetcar systems, rail systems all over the world, they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't done randomly. And that's what they want us to believe. They want us to believe railroads and canals were being built in the early 1800s. At the same time, they tell us we didn't have that kind of technology then. And then when they talk about canal building and railroad building, they bring in shovels. That's not the first tool that comes to mind for building a railroad or a canal. So again, you're going back to the 1800s. That was the century when the controllers, or cabal, or whatever you want to call them, deep state, was resetting this previous civilization to the new world civilization that they wanted to bring in.
Which brings in some of the world fairs and things like that.
A lot of things happening at that time, about the same time that the Rockefellers were establishing the American educational system. The Crystal Palace Exposition took place in London in 1851. And for me, that was like the kickoff of this new timeline. But between 1800 and 1900, there was a lot going on. And, I could see patterns within that century of initiatory events, like in 1810, 1830, 1850, 1870, 1890. And in the early 1800s, there were settlers coming in and setting things up. 1830 was a little bit more developed, and they were bringing in beer and hard liquor. These distilleries and breweries were being set up all over the place. I mean, their goal is to keep us down.
Dumb down,
level
yes.
of consciousness. That was when they were going up the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. They're setting up shop with these places to bring in alcohol, and also department stores were coming in. There were pandemics coming in. There was yellow fever. There were some other things. And I think that's been part of the plan all along. Introduce the diseases that have probably all been engineered and provide the solution, and see what happens. And, we're kind of living in the time of probably the worst manifestation of it, but also the time when people are becoming more aware of it. But we were desensitized to it because it was part of a plan.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode,
Members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers. Behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else. And that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.